Hello, everyone, and welcome to the July 19th Hopkinton Zoning Advisory Committee meeting. And as a preliminary matter, I'll be reading through the remote meeting guidelines. So this is Mary Larson Marlowe. I'll do the roll call of members after I read the remote meeting script. This open meeting of the Zoning Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely consistent with the recently signed an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until April 1st, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of the governor's March 12th, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The new law has two major parts. First, the new law allows public bodies to continue providing live, adequate alternative means of public access to the deliberations of the public body instead of holding meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. Adequate alternative means may include, without limitation, providing public access through telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, or any other technology that enables the public to clearly follow the proceedings of the public body in real time. Second, the new law authorizes all members of a public body to continue participating in meetings remotely. The open meeting law's requirement that a quorum of the body and the chair be physically present at the meeting location remains suspended. For this meeting, the Zoning Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via Zoom app as posted on the town's web meeting calendar and the ZAC agenda identifying how the public may join. Additionally, this meeting may also be broadcast by HCAM TV through one of or many of its channels or platforms. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that others may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. I would like to do a roll call vote of the members of the Zoning Advisory Committee. So please respond in the affirmative if you are here. Ted.
Ted is here.
Rhea. I think Rhea was going to be absent tonight, if I'm not mistaken. Ron.
Ron is here.
Curtis.
Curtis is here.
Sundar. Okay, not yet. Madhu.
Here.
And Rachel. Not yet. Okay. And John? Not John Gelsich. John Coutinho? And no. Okay. And our staff, John Gelsich?
Present. And
And
Rachel.
this is Mary Larson Marlowe. I'm present.
I'm
Rachel
Rachel,
is
I'm
here.
present.
Rachel is here. She just.
Hello, Rachel.
Hello.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so we have a quorum. And okay. So what, let's see. I'm just going to pull up the agenda.
I had a general question as someone who's never been to a ZAC meeting outside of Zoom. How many people in the public showed up for meetings before?
On average,
Are we getting more attendance?
0.5.
Are we getting more attendance with Zoom than
Yeah.
otherwise? Okay, well, that's a good thing.
Okay. John, could you pull up the slides that Rachel sent over? You probably also have them in other forms, but just the slides from Growth Study Committee. That was going to be our first topic tonight. I'm hoping you all had a chance to read or at least skim through it, the Growth Study Committee report, and hopefully, even supplemental materials that Rachel provided links to. And we will be discussing, what we all found most relevant to ZAC in that, and to see whether or not we wanted to add things to our work plan, long-term work plan, and if it helps us prioritize the work that we already have on the plan. Okay, so Rachel agreed to go through this with us just to give an overview. John, were you able to find that? Great, thanks. Go ahead, Rachel.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm on a different computer, so it's a little wonky. All right. So the Growth Study Committee was formed about a year and a bit before I joined. So I joined like late in October of last year. And the Growth Study Committee was already well on its way to doing a lot of the directive of the planning board. So if you have questions, I might be able to respond to them, or it might be before I started. But this was the PowerPoint presentation that the Growth Study Committee Chair, Finn, presented to the planning board. And he talked a lot about what the planning board had asked the Growth Study Committee to do. And you can see it here on the slide. You can read it yourself. They had very specific requests of the Growth Study Committee. And I found that I joined halfway through, and some of these had really been completed, and some of them, they had veered to do some other things. So part of the Growth Study Committee report was about what specifically the project wanted them to do, and other things were just their recommendations that came about from their discussions. And some of this does relate to us, and some of it is kind of maybe more ancillary to what we do. So we can skim through this. I mean, pretty much the Growth Study Committee was formed because there were concerns at town meeting about the amount of growth that was going on, and did we have a handle on it, and could we fuel that growth or direct it in a certain way in the future. So part of what the Growth Study Committee did is this was what he's called data collection, which is effectively a comparison. If you go to the next slide, John, thanks. It's a comparison of Hopkinton's growth and how that growth has looked relative to some other towns. So you can see on the charts here, the population has grown quite a bit over the last 30 to 40 years. And the number of building permits on the right-hand side, the single families have been pretty steady. And you'll see in a minute that those dark green bars from 1990 to 2014 mirror a lot of what happened in the towns around us. It seems Hopkinton, we grew in single families a little bit later than some of the other towns around us, but the growth is similar. And I think what really prompted the Growth Study Committee is the yellow and blue bars on the far right, which are, the yellow is Legacy Farms, and the blue is the apartments on Lumber Street, if you're familiar with those. So those were just pretty much what's Hopkinton's experienced in the last, couple of decades, just to give it a perspective. John, if you flip to the next slide. Thanks. Yeah, this just goes into, Legacy Farms and what percentage is occupied and how much is built, which is interesting for historical purposes. If you keep flipping, John, thanks. So this is a really interesting slide. This is where we start to compare us to a group of towns that were considered in our comparison set, more near us and sort of similar in size, similar in structure. So as you can see, many of the towns saw growth in the 70s, 1980s, 1990s into 2000. And Hopkinton seemed to have lagged a little bit at that time, but then has picked up recently in the last 20 years and has really sort of accelerated growth in this period, leading up to where we're very close to some of our other comparison towns. Okay, keep flipping. Thanks, John. I know this is an eye chart. This is sort of comparing, all of the, can you see on the slides?
Speaking for myself, that's a pretty tough slide to read.
Yeah, it is. It's a very tough slide to read. I don't know, something's going on with my computer. I'm sorry. But effectively what they're trying to do is they're trying to compare Hopkinton to the other towns in terms of population density, in terms of students as a percentage of the population, budget. So they're just trying to give you a feel for how we compare to these other towns, how we're similar, how we're maybe a little bit different. There is a sort of a findings from this data, if you keep flipping, John.
So Rachel, before I do that, I don't know if everyone can see, I'm sharing the PDF on my screen, so it works for me. But if you can see my cursor, the first column is Hopkinton, the second is Acton, third is Medfield, fourth is Westboro, and the fifth is Westford. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of, it's the same for all of these in the same order.
Mhm.
May I ask a question? And maybe Rachel, you don't know the answer, or maybe somebody else does. Why are those, I realize somebody believed, or a group of people believed, that those are comparable towns.
Mhm.
The Westford is the one that throws me off the most. Geographically, it's quite a bit of distance away. How is it decided that those towns were the ones to compare us to?
Right, it's a good question. So there was a subcommittee of the Growth Study Committee, which spent quite a bit of time, and I was included in that, looking through all of the towns in Massachusetts and also some in Connecticut to see what was comparable. And we wanted to use groups of towns that weren't necessarily geographically exactly in our same area, but had population growth similar, had a similar tax base, had similar number of students. That's how we determined this group. Not necessarily that they were right in our area. And there were multiple discussions during the Growth Study Committee meetings about which towns we should use, because obviously, you know, the comparison changes depending on which towns you use, Ted.
Mhm.
But these were determined as like among all of the different metrics that we were hoping to compare, they were the most similar, if that makes sense. So they looked at budget, they look at construction, housing, taxes, all of those kinds of metrics.
And I'm not being critical. I'm just trying to understand.
No, it's okay. We had lots of heated discussions about which towns to put in the comparison group, because obviously it matters, when you compare to, I mean, if you compare Hopkinton to the average town in Massachusetts, you'll get a vastly different result than this, right?
Right. I don't want to add to the heat. So I'm really, a metric or two that you didn't mention, but maybe they were there. Median home price, was that one of the ones where it's similar?
Yes.
I don't know what the metric would be, but education level of residents, those are all also, because those strike me as kind of important measurements as well. And you didn't happen to mention them a second ago.
Yep, you're right. They were included. If you go into some of the backup documentation, you should see those information there. Education level, I'm not sure we used education level. We might have used income.
Okay.
Because they tend to be correlated, as you know.
Yeah.
More education means higher income.
Right.
But we can go into the backup documents and see some of those.
I don't want to slow us down very much.
Okay.
And
no, it's
if
a good
I
question.
may, yeah, just from the report itself, of course, this is a summary, but these four communities were selected based on comparable demographics, relative proximity, and similar high quality school districts. So all of those things are summarized in the report as the reasons.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
Mhm.
All right, John, can you keep flipping? I don't want to spend too much time on this. Another request that came from the planning board was about valuation of properties and what the future could hold. And the Growth Study Committee had a long conversation with the town CFO, Tim O'Leary. And he has an Excel tool that he uses to try to figure out valuations by property class, and he does projections. And so this is just an example of a projection that you could use with his tool. Really what he gave us was an Excel tool that you can use. You can put in different inputs to see what the valuation of by property class will be in the future. This was one of the requests from the planning board.
So I have a question on this slide. And it says estimated residential taxes. So does that, is that talking about just, I mean, is it really a projection of revenue for the whole town from taxes, or is it talking about the individual home situation, like different tax rates?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mary. So the actual tool he gave us provided the ability to project revenue for all of the property classes individually, residential, commercial, there's a couple of them.
Okay.
This chart was just an example of what you could do with residential.
Okay.
That
Thank
was
you.
the only purpose, is just to sort of showcase what, kind of a high case, medium case, low case, what the revenue could be in the future for residential. But the
Okay.
tool itself allows you to adjust each of those property classes separately. And in fact, the Growth Study Committee, we had good discussions about each of the different classes and how they've changed and what we've done relative to the other 4 towns that we're comparing to.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. John, if you can keep going, please. Thanks. Another request from the Growth Study Committee, which I'm sure we're all very interested in and familiar with, was to think about open space and maintaining open space in Hopkinton. Because of the towns that we compared to, we were one of the least dense towns, so in terms of population. So we thought about open land. That's the orange highlighted pieces here are land parcels that are considered kind of open or available for development. And there were discussions about how to preserve open space in the context of growth in the future. We can keep flipping.
Rachel, could I ask a question on that density? Was there any discussion about the effectiveness of the OSLPD bylaw in keeping a lot of open space?
It's a good question. I'm just trying to remember. There was a lot of discussions about maintaining open space, and there were a lot of concerns voiced about open space, to which some members of the Growth Study Committee who are developers and have been developers for a long time in the town kind of said, well, it's private property. We only have a limited amount of say in what happens with some of these pieces of land. Particularly, they talked about the YMCA, which is, I believe it's on the, I don't know, John, it's on the right-hand side. So both the Y and the Workers Association that's near that as well. There were long discussions, Ron, about those parcels of land and whether there could be sale of those in the future and could there be development there. I don't remember us talking specifically about any bylaws per se, but I can tell you there were long discussions about maintaining open space and maintaining what they called the quote unquote rural character of Hopkinton.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is my audio on?
Now it is. Yep.
Oh, good. I just, my iPad went down, so I'm using my phone.
Okay.
So I'm using my phone to speak, and I have my 30-inch screen so I can see the presentation. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up is, it's too bad that we weren't able to find any towns that were like us that had our density. To both Ron and Ted's interest in it, and I think that we're the ones that other towns might end up looking at, because this is all the west of 495 growth. Because some of the towns we're comparing us to, are inside the 495, 128 belt, and that's why there was so much more density. And because we've got that unique part where we have some spots that are quite dense, and then we have some other spots that we still have a rural feel, and then other parts where we're because we're truly suburban now, because 495 ended up becoming the 128 of just 30 years ago. I think that we, by doing the growth study and doing all of this, that we may be the
Model.
model. Thank you. The model that other towns are going to look at and say, okay, so what do they do? Where did they do things right? Where they have some stuff? So it's too bad we couldn't use some other towns. Like when we go to write our bylaws, like, okay, what did they say? So other people are actually going to use us on this one. But it worked out great, because I was on the board of selectmen when we wanted to get this stuff done, and it was real important. But that's why I saw the spike at 2016. I wasn't able to speak back then, when every developer in town, myself included, went and got all the building permits we needed for the next 18 months, just in case this passed, so that we could actually continue to work. And then nothing happened, and we were able to continue working for the next, now it's 5 years later. But anyway, sorry. Thank you so much for this slide.
Sure. Great. Thanks, John. So that was sort of the background and some of the information that the Growth Study Committee thought was sort of key for the planning board to hear. And obviously from a lot of that and discussions, there were recommendations that were made from the committee. And some of these are summarized here. There was long discussions about developing downtown. And when I say downtown, the Growth Study Committee defined downtown as all along Main Street, probably from where the traffic light is now, all the way up to the Common, and then some portion of 85 towards the high school. So just so we're all grounded in terms of what downtown means. That was the area they were thinking about developing as a place where zoning could be used to increase residential density. And the purpose of increasing residential density there is twofold. One is to preserve open space in other parts. And secondly, was also to create places where residents could purchase things on a more economic scale. So the Growth Study Committee had discussions about the fact that single family homes in Hopkinton were very expensive and just getting more expensive, and that it was difficult for some people to buy starter homes, and how could we use zoning to help us develop more economical residential areas where people could live and afford things. So it was those two goals combined.
Good.
John, if you want to keep going. Thanks. There was also a discussion about the 495 industrial area. There was a lot of concerns about the commercial tax base right now, which is formed by two large companies. And because of COVID, those buildings are relatively empty right now. And so there was concern that those buildings could be sold and made into something else, or perhaps that commercial revenue was at risk. And so the Growth Study Committee wanted to encourage commercial and industrial development in that area, partly to negate any questions around a large business moving out, and partly to improve the mix of revenue that the town gets, because we're very heavily dependent on residential revenue, residential tax base for our revenue. So this is more of a diversification. And out of those discussions came one of the major recommendations of the Growth Study Committee, which is to have an economic development officer in the town, reporting into the town manager. So someone who's going to be spending their time working with local businesses and trying to develop this whole area. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
Yeah, those are two great slides. This is, we usually wait till September to come up with, things to do. And I think that even this last two slides, what we can do downtown, it's something that we tried doing. I think, Mary, just before you came on, about 5 years ago, we tried to reduce the size of the lots. This is something that Elaine can help us on. So for the people downtown, because anytime somebody wants to do anything, they have to come to the zoning board of appeals. If they want to put a deck on, they want to fix their back porch, whatever they do, because the lot size is 15K. And the average size lot in the downtown area is about 7 or 8K. So
Mhm.
everybody's got to come, so people can't work on their houses, but that might be something to do, just what she was just saying, to try and spur some lower cost housing, maybe going downtown or something. And this one, we're always talking about what do we want to do on South Street, Lumber Street, and Elmwood Park. If we start talking about it now, which is these are the extra months that we never had before. We start talking about, are there some out of the box stuff, or doing the what are they 43Bs, John? The live work play stuff. So trying to encourage that whole thing, because we've got the apartments there already, but is there a way that we can encourage people to come here instead of Southborough or Milford? So anyway, these are great slides.
I agree.
Great, thanks. So again, as I talked about just earlier, trying to keep the rural character of Hopkinton through a number of different strategies. So there was discussion about purchasing of development rights and some open space, conservation easements. There were a number of discussions about keeping the open space that we have already and what we could do in the future to disincentivize growth, is the way it's written it, but really it was incentivizing growth in other areas, was the way the committee talked about it. Okay, John, do you want to keep going? Another big request from the Growth Study Committee is to just have a dashboard to monitor the growth. So we found that the town departments individually were doing this on their own, but there was no centralized location and a place where people could go to and say, this is what's going on with growth, because there was a lot of disagreement, frankly, at the beginning of the Growth Study Committee about whether we had too much growth or not enough growth, or just the right amount. So we have asked that the town maintain a dashboard that's public to track permits and some of this information that you've seen already, school enrollment, all of those different pieces in one place, so that we all agree on what is the baseline for growth, what's going on right now. Does that make sense to everybody? This was a big surprise for me. I was surprised that there wasn't one central repository where all this information lived, that each individual town departments was sort of tracking it on their own. Right. And then there was the new housing law that this was only very briefly discussed almost to the end of the Growth Study Committee. I guess there's a new housing choice law, and I don't know as much about it. I'm sure people on this call know a lot more than I do, that requires that if you're an MBTA community, which we are because we are near the Southborough train station, Southborough MBTA commuter rail station, that we need to have housing within a half a mile of that. So there was some very brief discussions about how we could fulfill that requirement and what that means for zoning. in that area of Hopkinton that's very close to the Southborough commuter rail.
Rachel, really quickly, and I think, John, you mentioned to us about the MBTA. It's not that we have to have housing, we have to have zoning that allows dense housing, right?
Mhm.
Just to be clear, there's a little bit of a difference there, I think.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep, good point.
And
But
to
right
be-
now that area doesn't have zoning for high density.
Right.
And to be even more clear, it's not, there's not a lot of direction right now as to whether that higher rate of housing needs to be within that half mile, or if it's just that if you have a station within a half mile, you need to have that type of housing somewhere in town. So we are still
Okay.
waiting on guidance from the state on that, and they are still acknowledging that they need to provide additional guidance on what that requirement actually means.
Interesting. Okay.
So, sorry, John, that last point you said, that zone doesn't have to be within half a mile, but anywhere in town? Is that what you just said?
So that's what a question. So we've had a whole bunch of meetings and conferences about this, and that question has been asked, and we haven't gotten an actual answer saying, nope, it means it's within the half mile. It's more of, well, we need to figure out the guidance on what all of this actually means for MBTA communities. So we'll have to get back to you and provide more guidance. So
Got it.
right now, it's unclear as to whether that zone needs to be located within the half mile buffer of the train station, which for Hopkinton would be a very small portion of town that would qualify, or if it just means that if you have one of those stations within half mile, you then have to have a higher density zone somewhere in town.
Got it.
We haven't gotten a definitive answer about that yet.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. And then the Growth Study Committee wanted to give specific recommendations to the planning board of what they think the next steps should be. So, I mean, you can read these here. I mean, their big requests were for an economic development officer and a town dashboard. They also had some other things to consider for the planning board that you can read here. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I appreciate
Sure.
that.
And I encourage everybody to go to the Growth Study Committee website, the link, and read all of there's draft materials. There's a lot more data there for those of you that are interested in all the underlying numbers. There's a lot of information there. One thing that wasn't on the slides I was surprised at that dominated the data discussion was around Hopkinton's growth, which is the reason for the committee in the first place, right? The people were concerned that we were growing too fast or growing more than the surrounding towns. And sort of what we found was if you were to take out Legacy Place and the apartments on Lumber Street, we've been through a growth surge, but no more than towns similar to ours. We just had it later than other towns. So there was a lot of back and forth about, are we going to get more growth in the future now that we've gone through this surge, or is the surge going to quiet down? And there was perspectives on both sides. There was perspectives from developers that residential housing is basically flat in all of these communities and it's going to stay flat for the next couple of decades. And there were other parts of the Growth Study Committee that felt that our growth was going to accelerate because of the open space and that we needed to plan for that now. So I just wanted to put it out there to everybody on this committee as an open discussion and a place where I don't think the Growth Study Committee actually landed on a particular finding.
But it
So
was
Rachel-
clear that even with the legacy farms and the apartments, that the number of school children has not dramatically changed in 30 years or more.
So that's a good question, Mary, because obviously the number of school-age children is really important for our town.
Mhm.
And what we found is if if you take out Legacy Farms and if you take out the apartment buildings on Lumber Street, then you're correct. The number of students is remained, relatively constant. But I would encourage you to listen to the school committee meetings in which they discuss additional enrollments because Legacy Farms caused a surge in school enrollments. And we are seeing a surge in young children coming into the town because our school systems are highly rated. So there were a lot of discussions around that during the growth study committee. And there was feelings on both sides. I'm trying to capture it as best I can, but there were strong feelings on both sides. One for the fact that we've been through our growth surge and the number of students will flatten out and it'll be manageable. And another section of the committee that felt that there was going to be even more surging population in the school system that we needed to plan for.
I didn't really see a lot of data supporting that latter view.
You're right.
So
That you're right. In the final, it wasn't there.
Okay.
I think where the growth study committee came down was that the school enrollment is part of school committee, and it's something that the school committee should be working on, and that it was not necessarily part of the growth study committee and what we were supposed to achieve from the planning board,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I mean, the growth in housing is directly, linked to the growth in number of students. So, yeah. I'm just looking for some of the graphs. I'm in the study report. Oh, anyhow, okay, I understand what you're saying, though.
We had Carol Kavanaugh come and speak to us. Dr. Kavanaugh came to speak to the growth study committee because they did look at an early draft and there were long conversations about student enrollment.
Yeah.
And in general, I think the final outcome was that we felt the school committee should be handling school enrollment, except for the fact that the town needed to have a dashboard, right? So that was part of the reason of we all need to know what the numbers are, because
Right.
if you don't go to school committee,
it doesn't help any of the rest of us if the school committee holds all those numbers. And I'm not saying that they're hoarding information.
No,
don't get me wrong, but
yeah, no, I understand it.
But yeah,
that was the kind of the outcome. Same
good that we
as your
share.
feelings.
yeah.
Is that we all share the information so that there can be cross-pollination between finance and the school and the planning board and all of those groups and all the people in the town, so that we all know what that was, because there's some very strong concerns from the school committee about school enrollment that you might not see in the data that we have here.
Got it.
Yeah,
That makes
Sally,
Go ahead.
yeah, I just want to add something to your point. I think in previously there was definitely a narrative created that Legacy Farms has created an extraordinary burden on the town services. And I was under the impression that much of the data that we saw in maybe in the draft reports of the previous ones was that no, that's not necessarily true. This is sort of par for the course in terms of it was just a delayed growth. So Rachel, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you said. You seem to imply that the school committee may have a slightly different view of this, meaning they do feel that Legacy added more of a burden on the school system as against just an organic growth in enrollments based on just the number of homes being built?
Right. So it's a good question. And I don't want to call it burden. It's a question of, did we plan for it? I mean, obviously people knew that Legacy Farms was going to increase student enrollment, right? That's why the town figured in additional tax payments from Legacy Farms, right? I mean, so we planned for that, right?
Yes.
So it's not a burden. I wouldn't call it a burden to the town. It did increase our enrollment numbers in the school. I guess what the growth study committee is saying is that it was it was planned for. We knew it was coming, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we asked for Legacy to have additional tax payments so we can fund the schools.
Right.
Now, if you're on the school committee side of it, they will tell you that the state does not allow additional building until you can actually prove that school enrollment is going to be the numbers you claim. So you can't ask the state for money based on school enrollment projections. You can only ask for it based on actual numbers.
I found that very interesting.
It was very interesting. And- Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense that you don't want to overbuild based on projections, and certainly not on state money,
Right.
But at the same time, yeah, even though we knew it was coming, it probably caught us off guard in some ways.
Right. So Mary, you're right. 2 points to that. So one, the constriction related to school, or the feelings of the school committee that they're burdened, I don't want to call it burdened, that they're seeing more or having to do more, is one, in terms of building capacity, right? Because you can't build the building until the children are actually there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first thing. And then the second point they made was related to additional requirements from the state about the size of classrooms and the requirement for special education, that a lot of those requirements were new from the state, and they were putting additional burdens on both the physical buildings and the services of the school.
So they required lower number or lower density in classrooms at the same time that we were seeing an increase in population.
Yeah, it was like a
For children?
perfect storm, Mary.
Yep.
So it's basically a perfect storm for Hopkinton, right? If you're in a town where it's consistent growth over time, right, and the state requires you to have new requirements for size of classroom or for special education, then you can handle that. But we're in the perfect storm of, we've got a surge of students coming in, and the town is highly rated for its school system, right? And we've got all this building, and now we have all this open space. So if you think about it, it's like there's just many, many factors coming in that's making the school committee work harder for what it needs to do,
Right.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
It does. It's interesting. If you go into the committee report itself, there is an interesting chart which says percentage of HPS students of the total population. It goes all the way from 2004 until 2020. And, in 2004, students made up 24%. Oh, yeah, that's the one, exactly. And that number is actually, down to 22% now.
22%. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And that's total. I believe that's
exactly.
total. I apologize. This graph in the PDF I have, this graph got cut off. I don't know why.
Right. I mean, this includes legacy. Of course, it includes legacy. I mean, it's the entire population. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's important to see. And and here is the school population is basically, and this is just for the last 10 years. So 3,500. It's actually a little bit lower, but then the 560 from Legacy, and it started approximately 8 years ago. So that's when we started seeing the surge. And so it is all in very recent memory, and it's in very recent times that these particular aspects of the growth are affecting us. And so we are obviously still in catch-up mode from the school's point of view, and building adequate space to accommodate that, as well as dealing with the fact that aging schools simply needed to be replaced, like Center School. So that was a separate issue.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mary, may I ask a question about the graph, the green and blue graph there?
Mhm.
It's broken into students from Legacy Farms and other Hopkinton students. It seems to be forgetting about the apartments over on Lumber Street. Do the students from the apartments get wrapped into, quote, other Hopkinton students?
I believe they are in this particular case, but on a lot of the other graphs,
They had a
they
separate.
lump the apartments on Lumber Street in with Legacy Farms because the time frame of their building was about the same.
Right, that's what I'm wondering.
And it's a good question, Ted, because the apartment buildings definitely added to the school population.
Sure.
And I don't know if that was planned for or not, or discussed the way Legacy Farms was discussed.
Yeah, and that was another question I had too, and I don't know if anyone here can answer or if it's even our purview, but was there that built-in, if the school population goes up by X%, pitch in more money, if the Lumber Street developer had a similar deal worked or not?
Yeah,
I don't
Ted,
know.
the paragraph about that green, Mary, if you don't mind scrolling down a little bit, or rather up, sorry.
Up? Okay.
Yeah, there. No,
Well,
not too far. Just,
That one?
there is one section which says, outside of Legacy, the population growth, school population growth has been net zero.
And I'm just wondering if they're being lazy about lumping Legacy and, what's it called, Windsor? Somebody help me, what are the apartments called now?
Moderna or something?
Madeira now?
Moderna.
I don't think it is that anymore. I think
Not Moderna like the vaccine.
no, right, but I think it's something else.
Windsor.
Anyway, Sundar, I just don't know if there's a bit, and I don't mean this to sound negative, laziness in the presentation of the data. If the blue is Legacy and the apartments, or if the apartments are intentionally meant to be part of the green. I just don't know.
Mhm.
I can read what it says there. I'm not sure if it's as cut and dry as it says there.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but certainly all the backup data is available
Yeah,
in the spreadsheets. So we can definitely look there.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Let's
mean,
do
my
that.
logic comment is that HPS students as a percentage of the total population is actually down from 24 to 22. So, I mean, I wonder how much of this is just we not planning for that. I know it did come as a shock to the school, you know, the 500, 559, and then the 441 and 325. But if, you know, if the population growth, unless we're saying that the population growth itself is unexpected, but I'm not certain how to read that in that case, because those percentages of students as a percentage of population is actually down 2 percentage points from
Mhm.
2004.
Yes,
Just one other point to put in there. I'm sorry, Mary.
that's
One other
a-
point that that Dr. Kavanaugh talked about is the fact that this town has students that switch back and forth between private schools and the public schools. And although those numbers are small, it does impact school enrollment year to year and adds for variation in school enrollment year to year. So it's just something to keep in mind that this is obviously enrollment in Hopkinton Public Schools, but in
Right.
fact, many students are enrolled outside of the Hopkinton Public School system.
Okay. All right. So what I would like to do is hear from each of you in turn about what the big take homes in terms of zoning advisory committee action you feel came out of this report. You know, what spoke to you as being the most relevant, the most timely in terms of actions to take. And I'll help you out by saying that the dashboard and the economic development office are not within our purview, but they are being acted on elsewhere. So focus on things that are zoning related and things that we could actually take action on. And it may not be something that we would do solely ourselves. It may be something part of a larger effort if it needs more community involvement. You know, so that those are all a possibility, but if it's zoning related and it spoke to you while reading this report or hearing this presentation or any of the above, please speak up. And I'm going to make all of you talk. So anybody can go first. Volunteers?
I'll go. I think open space preservation, doing everything we can to keep the rural nature of Hopkinton alive would be extremely important.
Okay. Thanks, Curtis. Anything else? I'm not restricting anybody to just one. If you have more than one that jumped out at you.
Mary, I'll jump in, especially since I accidentally left my mic on a second ago. So I've highlighted two and then a third. I'll do what I mean by the third in a moment. I know that the Economic Development Officer is outside of our purview. However, I fear that at times I come across as anti-business in our meetings, and I am not, but I think the types of businesses that we attract for commercial revenue really, really matter. So I think that is a zoning issue, but I think that an economic development officer would really help. I do think, and I've been at town meeting talking, and I've been in these talking, I do think that there are real big differences. While all commercial development can generate tax revenue, I think different businesses have a hugely different impact on the feel and nature of our town. So I think that that's an important piece, and an economic development officer would certainly help, but that can be something that we can discuss as well. But my two biggest priorities, I think, are open space preservation, tree preservation, and I am very interested in making sure Hopkinton, depending on how you look at it, remains a place where first-time home buyers, and when I say home, I really mean a house where you don't have a neighbor on the other side of your wall, a place where those families can come in. So downtown density, affordable housing, and then anecdotal evidence is almost worthless, I'm aware, but I do live close to downtown, and a number of the homes in my neighborhood in recent years have become rental properties where the landowner does not live in the home. And here's the anecdotal evidence that may be worthless. You can see a degradation in the quality of the look of those homes when they become rental units. Just today, I was talking to the owner of the house across the street from me, which has been a rental home for a number of years. And because the tenant didn't tell the landlord about things that were going on with the house was falling apart. And we could see it from across the street. We could see shutters coming off. We could see bushes overgrown. There's a bush right over there that is nothing but poison ivy at this point, because the owner of the home is never at the home. So I am interested in making more affordable housing very, very, very much. I'm also interested in maintaining a neighborhood looking cared for, where the owners of the property take an active interest in making things look good.
Okay,
So that to me is a bit of a puzzle to figure.
got it.
I can go next.
Okay, thanks, Sundar.
Sure. So this is something you probably heard me say earlier, Mary. Our tax ratio is skewed in favor, very much in favor of residents bearing the brunt. 84% of taxes come from residential taxes, 16 from businesses. I think it's an unfair burden on residents. So anything that we can, as a ZAC, help in move the needle towards more businesses. Only because, beyond living in a great town, I think the price that we pay is enormous tax burden. So anything that can shift the burden to businesses, I would be supportive of that. At this point, I don't know what those moves are, but to a certain extent, I think we spoke about, again, not our purview, but the economic office, and what we can do as a zoning advisory committee to encourage businesses. That's one part. Definitely making denser housing available. And this is less to do with quote unquote affordable housing that you and I have been talking about, Mary, and more about just the fact that there is a huge price point. Very, very high cost of entry into the town. We have to bring that down. We have to make this attractive to young couples and professionally mobile bachelor's, so on and so forth. I mean, bring it down. And if that means a denser housing, that's what I would definitely encourage. Now, beyond that, of course, I love the character of the town. The rural nature of the town is really beautiful. It's elegant, and that's what makes it attractive. But I think there has to be a sort of a marriage of preserving that, yet bringing in more affordability and definitely bringing in more tax revenue from non-resident sources.
Okay, good, thanks.
Can I go next?
Yes, please.
It's similar to what Sundar was saying, so I thought like I can add on to it. One of the growth study points was about looking for new ways to increase development in industrial A. As a third person, as an outsider, just looking at development with I don't know the nitty-gritty numbers. A thriving area of Hopkinton, from what I see, is the area where the Spoon and the Windsor Ridge and all that stuff. That area seems to be thriving. Both commercial and residential seem to be surviving next to each other, seems to be happy and thriving. And that zoning is neighborhood mixed use district. Maybe bringing a little bit of neighborhood mixed use district to some areas of industrial A where it can work. But if you look at the language in our zoning bylaw for mixed use district, it speaks heavily about affordable housing. Maybe if we have something similar that encourages work-life play kind of a thing, so we accomplish multiple goals. If Zach wants to improve that kind of lifestyle where young couples can come in, there is industrial also, like if professional offices are there next to apartment building, you're encouraging both of them. So maybe tweaking a little bit of, or understanding what the language is for the next neighborhood mixed use district and see if we can expand it somewhere else where it works might help. And along with taking into account all the learnings from growth study, not putting too much burden on the schools by adding development without concern.
So Mary, can I just
Yes.
jump in? So sorry, I had to say goodnight to my kids. I was going to say this after Sundar talked. Just one thing I want to mention, something food for thought for Ted and Sundar and everyone else. If you increase density in the downtown, how do you make sure that those new units go to first-time home buyers and not rental focused owners? I don't know if there's an answer right now.
Yeah, good point. Not
Let's
to be
think about it.
answered right at this moment. Just think. Okay.
Right, just think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good point. Okay,
And I
John
think-
or Rachel?
Yeah. Well, I think that I already injected that during the presentation, that and this picks up what Ted was talking about, and Sundar is looking at that downtown again, and to try and get two things done. When you talk about a lot of land right now in Hopkinton, I believe there's only one available, and I think it's $500,000 or $550,000. There's one lot available. So if it's possible to make a buildable lot downtown smaller. Now, this gets right back into what John was saying. We might not be able to control whether it's a first-time home buyer house or it's a rental house, but you can't put too big a house on a 7,000 square foot lot anyway. But that's one of the things I think we should try and look at, because it's twofold help. It's going to help the people in the downtown area so they don't have to go to ZBA every time they want to do something. Because we just about every week we have somebody from Walcott or A, B, or C Street wanting to do something to their house, and they have to come to the ZBA, and it's usually innocuous and it's fine and everything, but they have to do the 12 sets of prints. They've got to put it in the newspaper. They've got to, some of them might have to hire a lawyer because they're nervous about coming in front of a 9-person board and stuff. But anyway, I think that's one of them. And the other one is again, is the picking up on, it's great going last, you can pick up on what other people say. Can we do a live, work, and play someplace else? Is there someplace closer to the train station? Is there a spot available where we can do that high density stuff. I don't know, maybe it's not in a half mile, and to John's point, maybe we already have it when we have Windsor. But, it really is something we should look at to try and open up our town for people that don't have to have, 6 and 7 figure incomes to move here. It's a great thing as a real estate agent, I'll tell you, having, all 7 figure houses to sell. But it just doesn't seem right that we can't, whether they're renting or living here, that you have to be, you have to have a double, 2 6-figure income people in order to move here. It's great, but it's a double-edged sword. So I think we've got some really great stuff from these slides that we can sink our teeth into and see what we can try and pull off. But again, no matter what we do, we still have to sell at the town meeting. So
Oh, yeah.
Through the chair, if I could address the first point from John. So one of my goals of this year, we have to come up with 3 goals to satisfy. One of them is I am planning on doing a map that identifies the non-conforming lots in downtown and elsewhere, really, to determine whether the zoning that is in place is actually effective. And I referenced John on this one because when I was telling Elaine about it, she was like, "Did John put you up to this?" I said, "No, I actually, I'm inspired by Somerville," which I don't know how many of you are familiar with what Somerville did. They did something like this a few years ago. They did a zoning conformance analysis and found out that 22 lots in the entire city actually conformed to the zoning that they had in place. Which prompted a huge rewrite of their zoning. And I don't think there's going to be the same thing in Hopkinton, but just an understanding as to, if you have a certain lot size in downtown that's required by zoning, but only 50% of the lots actually conform to that, is it worthwhile keeping that lot size, or does it make more sense to make the zoning actually conform to what's on the ground in a place like downtown where it's pretty built out, it's historic, it's old development, that type of stuff. So I think that might answer John's first point. And like I said, I think, John, you've done something like this in the past. That's what Elaine was saying. So I can definitely keep you up to date with my efforts. The issue is that we don't right now have a workable zoning shapefile. So we need to get that in shape so that I can actually use it in GIS.
If I may, John, one of the things, we do have a lot of information from, I think it was maybe 7 years ago now, but we didn't record meetings, but we did a lot of data. Elaine has a ton of info on it. It really is. It's probably only about 25% meet the criteria. Maybe it's 22%. It was really low. And we were trying to bring it up to like 65%, just to try and bring it up a little bit. But one of the issues that we ran into was there were people that said that we were just trying to commercialize it. And we were trying to change these lot sizes so people could put up more stores all down Walcott and A, B, and C Street. And so, so I think it's, again, this is what up to us to really tell people that we're really trying to do a residential thing, and that we're trying to make our town more and this is something we never even thought that we would have to sell. That it didn't even hit us that, wow, people are going to think that, we're going to try and make this attractive for people to plow down houses and put up businesses. But no, that wasn't what we were trying to do. And, but then again, it does fit into what else we're trying to talk about if we want to get more businesses. I don't know. So maybe I'm talking out both sides of my mouth by accident.
Yeah. I should say I'm not doing this with any agenda or outcome expected. I am doing it almost purely academic, and then moving from there.
Well, it'll be good data to have, John. So Ron, it's your turn.
Yeah, so I love the slide, Rachel, of the open space, the large parcels and those things. And I'm just very pleased that the OSLPD has worked so well over the years to preserve that. And I just want to continue to support that. And to echo what Ted talked about in terms of the economic development officer, we're in a competitive war out there with other communities. And we need to be fighting tooth and nail to get the best companies and corporations in the world that want to locate here. And we've got to go after them. So yes, it's out of our purview, but it's absolutely essential. And then, one of the other things that's on our workflow plan is to really take a look at the parking requirements in industrial A and B, and we'll begin to work on that. And we just do everything we can to make the town as attractive as possible, because Sundar's absolutely correct. We have to get the percentage of revenue coming from industrial commercial higher than it is now, or we're all going to get priced out of here. So thanks so much for sharing that.
Mary?
Sorry, I'm muted.
That's okay.
Rachel, do you have your favorite take homes from this?
Mary, before Rachel goes, may I ask Rachel a question that popped into my head because of Ron's comment?
Sure.
Rachel, as part of the comparisons with those other 4 or 5 towns, did we get a sense of their residential tax burden versus commercial, and where do we fit with them?
Yes, we did. Good question. We did get that comparison, and our tax percentage of residential is similar to those other towns. And just frankly, our tax rate is lower. I know that people feel like they pay a lot of tax in this town, but I can tell you from the actual numbers, we're on the lower end of comparable towns of tax rate. Now, many towns have, a couple of these towns are interesting to look at. So, a couple of them have different things. So Westboro, as we all know, has a lot of commercial and industrial, right? We all know that. I mean, it's a bigger town. They just have a lot more to start with. So they're a somewhat different town to compare to. We're similar to Acton. As you can see, Acton's actually even more residential. Westford, we're similar. Medfield is even more residential than us. So from a comparison point, I mean, we're in a similar range, but I can tell you our tax rate is a little lower than some of these other ones. And that was actually going to be my comment, Mary, is that just having been on the growth study committee, I was so impressed with what the town has done to manage growth over these last 30 or 40 decades. I'm very impressed with the abilities of the people on the committee, the people on the boards, what they've done to commit to open space, how they've managed the growth. I think Hopkinton's done a phenomenal job. And I think going forward, we should encourage both us and the planning board to actively manage growth. I think that was kind of like my takeaway, is that we really should continue on the path we're on and actively manage it. It was one of the slides that talked about in the early part of the presentation that talked about making sure that the planning board is more proactive and less reactive, right? That a lot of things just come before the planning board if people want to do things, that we should be able to put things in place to manage the growth, to continue our open spaces, to support many of those goals, and actively managing it instead of being the passive recipients of what comes at us. And I know that's kind of a broad takeaway, but I think that was my feeling coming out of the growth study committee.
Good, thank you.
Mary, may I ask a question about that graph? I don't know what personal property means. How is that different from residential? Is that taxing boats?
So, John, you can probably explain this the best, but we talked about it during, a couple of years ago when we were talking about.
That's the goods that are inside of businesses, the computers, the desks, the stuff. And that's
Manufacturing
why-
equipment.
Yeah, and that's why when people say, hey, if Dell doesn't sell the buildings, we're still gonna get our tax money. No, we get a fraction of it because we tend to bring in a lot of money from the stuff. Because we actually go in there and tax them on everything that's inside the buildings, all the improvements and everything else. And that's what we end up losing when there are empty buildings. Not only to Ted's point, when a house is empty, it tends to deteriorate. The same thing happens to buildings, and then they become less attractive to people that want to come in and buy them or anything else. But it's the stuff inside of businesses.
Okay, and I think we've talked about that before, which is one of the reasons I was not in favor of storage facilities as a way to get commercial. Why is it called personal property, not business property? If that's what that yellow section means.
No idea.
I don't know either, but I know I've heard it for the last, 30 years that I've been in business. So I think it's something in early laws, and that's the term that was used. Ron, do you know anything?
So without a doubt, then the red and the yellow represents commercial tax income.
Mhm.
And the blue is the only one that is household income.
It's residential property tax, yeah.
Right, okay.
That is correct.
And I am not wise or intelligent. Where does excise tax fit in there? What about like the taxes on cars and stuff? Doesn't that don't I write that check to the town of Hopkinton? And where is that represented in this? Is that in the blue as part of residential tax base?
John Gelsich?
From what I understand, this is just
No.
property taxes, this isn't excise taxes.
Okay.
Because I don't know about that.
I don't know if I can answer that.
Okay. We can ask Tim O'Leary sometime.
Yeah, it probably is just residential taxes,
Property
real estate taxes. That's what I meant, sorry.
So what's interesting to me then in this is we are in this little pod of towns, we're the second best at getting tax revenue from corporations, businesses. For all of the complaining we hear that we are putting too much burden on residents, we're actually the second best in that world.
Of course, it's based on this set of peer towns,
Right.
which were not chosen necessarily for the mix of business and commercial being, business and residential being similar.
Right.
They were chosen more on residents' demographics and things like that. So,
And there's the good school systems and stuff, because
and good school
again,
systems, yeah.
This was really sparked by number of students coming into the schools and everybody panicking. It was costing a lot of money.
Yeah.
And thinking that all the growth was coming from legacy farms. And so so it's really great how this growth study really woke up the town to, hey, we're not that bad here, we're not that bad there. The taxes really aren't that bad. And to Ted's point, we're at 84%, but still to be at 69 would be a heck of a lot better. But then again, where do we build that out? It's just,
Yeah, we don't have the,
Route 9 going through it. Do we want a Route 9 going through? No, I don't
Yeah.
think so.
we don't have that location. We don't have all that real estate available
Right.
on a Route 9 situation like Westboro. But I don't know if I'd want it anyhow.
Exactly.
I really don't want to sound like I'm critiquing the growth study committee because I applaud all of it and I did not volunteer to be on it, nor have I read the report. So I want to be very clear, I'm not being critical of anything. Looking at this graph and some of the others, I really wish we had more than 4 towns to compare ourselves to, so that we could have a better sense of where we fit with a lot of the different graphs that we looked at. And
Rachel?
I think before we go too far, basing too many future plans on a graph like what we see in front of us, we ought to look for some more comparisons to really help ourselves with some of these things. Because
Rachel, is there raw data
really-
from other towns beyond these 5?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's a great question, and I really appreciate your point, Ted, because frankly, I made it in the growth study committee. But they had decided that they were going to use 4 comparison towns. There is data pulled for every town in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I know because I pulled it.
Okay.
I don't know if it's this data, but we have data for every town in Massachusetts. And there were discussions during the growth study committee about comparing to places like Sharon, which has a tax rate. You think our tax rate is bad. You haven't seen Sharon's tax rate recently. And it's like a very, very high percentage of residential property taxes and has a very high tax rate. I'm with you, Ted. I think we should have a bigger comparison set, but you have to be careful what you compare, right? Because towns are so different. I mean, you can say we're similar to Sharon, right? And someone else can argue that we're not, right?
Sure.
So you can compare to towns on the coast, Ipswich. You can compare to Cape Cod, right? But there are obviously uniquenesses of each town. So I agree. It'd be nice to see it against a broader set. We can work on providing that information or whatever information you guys think is relevant for the town, for a broader set of towns. And I agree with you. It would be helpful. These towns were chosen based on a number of different factors for the report.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit on Ted's side on this. I would have loved to see sort of 2 views to this, and I don't know if the study committee took that into account. One is just the immediate neighborhood, the fact that we are adjoining with Southborough, Westborough, Milford, Ashland would be one view, and then the second one would be what you've done here, which is comparable socioeconomic factors, comparable amount of open land, comparable school systems and all that. That would have been awesome, because inherently nobody would quibble if we compared ourselves to our neighborhood towns as well, which not all of them are made the same, but that would be. But this is still a phenomenal study.
Thank you.
I agree. Thanks for that point. And a lot of these towns were chosen partly because of the initial requirement, as John talked about, the surge in school enrollment and the fact that our school systems were feeling burdened and that we had a very high rating for our school systems. And that was some of the reasons that the immediate towns around us, like Milford, were not chosen in this comparison set. Not that that's right. I'm just saying that that was some of the reasoning behind this set of towns.
So my takeaways, the biggest one was this downtown focus of downtown investigating the best way to increase residential density in the downtown in order to support not only the economic development downtown and the vibrancy of that, but also to potentially increase attainable housing. If those of you who may not be aware, but right now, Sundar and I are the sole members of an attainable housing subcommittee of the planning board. And we have been working with the trust fund, affordable housing trust fund committee as well in town. But just examining different ways that, and I'm using attainable as, it's not necessarily an industry-wide accepted term, but it's to differentiate from the affordable housing that is the state mandate kind of thing. So, attainable being the not necessarily state mandated, price controlled, but our concept of having better economic diversity in town and starter homes and so on and so forth. So, though that part of the the growth study committee report spoke to me. It's like, I think that it makes a lot of sense to do some focus down there in terms of overlay districts, in terms of that development. But it is going to take some investigation and some community outreach and work by us to do that. A number of things that I saw in here as specific things within the report that I saw as encouraging things we already had on our list, and perhaps increasing them in priority or looking at them in a slightly different way. One was investigate form-based zoning, which we have on our list, and John is going to be presenting to us sometime in September, October timeframe, if I recall correctly. The second was kind of improving the readability and understandability of our zoning bylaws, and that not being zoning changes, but really just administrative and organizational changes or additions to the zoning bylaw, charts to figure out which zoning is applicable for you. Yeah, that sort of thing. That is, it's kind of been on the back burner for a long, long time, but it was mentioned in here as something important. The disincentivizing green space development. And, obviously a lot of our work over the last several years has been always with this in mind, but finding more vigorous ways to pursue this, finding ways to, most of the growth study committee mentions of different programs are based on the property owner's choice of joining that program. Say I can't remember the terms, but you saw the list. It was putting conservation restrictions and things like that. So it's the property owner needs to not only know about this possibility, know what the benefits are to them, because there's some tax incentives for a period of time in certain cases. But there's a lot more programs than I was aware existed. I was aware of certain ones of them, but not all of them. And I think even just being able to speak intelligently about them, so educate all of ourselves about all of those programs, and being able to use that in conversation around town will help in the long run. We can't force people into them, but it's better that we know what we're talking about when we try to introduce them. So that's something. And then, of course, the newer things, the new housing choice law and the overlay, whether it has to be near the MBTA station or not near the MBTA station, that is something that we can take action on, and a fairly low-hanging fruit. But that, will be after we get some guidance through John Gelsich. And then South Street or South Street 495 corridor industrial districts, the focus on labs and manufacturing. Now, this is something, of course, that we came to the conclusion of ourselves 2 years ago when we went through kind of a process of what kind of businesses should we encourage. And so this reinforces it from that perspective. And but I think that they also have introduced some other ideas. But we've talked about the live, work, play. We need to address the issue of if we're saying we're going to allow residential in industrial zones, doesn't that just increase the housing, increase the burden on schools, et cetera, et cetera? But we're going to have to deal with that no matter what, in terms of increased housing density. So we're going to have to be able to address those points, those concerns that people have about density versus the school burden. Let's see. And business improvement district is a mass state statute. So that's something that I want to look into and make sure that we are all educated about and see whether or not it is something that would be helpful in town. So that is something that I definitely need to educate myself about. And in terms of the Economic Development Office, I'm in agreement with everybody. I think it's a good idea. It was recommended in the master plan from 2017. And I remember highlighting it in that when I was reading through it. So it's not a new idea, but it's definitely a good idea. One thing that Planning Board and Gary is pushing particularly is having Mr. Kamalo and I think a few other, perhaps even some representatives of the chamber come talk to us about the Economic Development Office and officer and understand the various ways that we could make this happen, where it should report, how it should be funded, that sort of thing. We have heard just bits and pieces that there's some concern that it shouldn't be, as part of the town government because of some restrictions on the activity of that person. But really, we want to bring it all out into the open so we can all discuss it. So that is planned right now for September 13th at the Planning Board meeting. And I would strongly encourage all of us to attend and speak as personal citizens trying to encourage this Economic Development Office. So if that date changes, I'll let you guys know, but keep an eye on agendas as well. All right. Okay, this has been an incredibly productive discussion. It went longer than I expected the Growth Study Committee portion of this discussion to be tonight. And because of that, I am proposing that we do not get into our other discussions tonight because I was hoping to end around 8:30. Yes, go ahead.
Quite a while ago, Chief Slayman popped into our meeting.
I saw that.
And I'm wondering if something came up that he wanted to comment on, especially because it feels like we're moving towards wrapping up.
Hi, Chief Slayman. How are you?
Hi, everybody. I appreciate you noticing me. Mostly I am watching this wonderful work. I have a lot of interest in public safety and how through either growth study or some of the work that you do that we might be able to be a little more effective instead of just building fire stations and hiring more firefighters. So that's where I'm listening. And density is kind of an interesting topic. It's really gotten a lot of momentum from your committee, from the state. So I'm listening. It was really neat, the fact that the solution at Legacy Farms in density was that they protected those buildings in a different way. With the home fire sprinklers, and I talk about those a lot. I guess what I'm looking for is, the difference is downtown's closer to the fire station, and there's municipal water, and those are good things. So maybe, and the question of affordability comes in. So I'm really just studying all of your comments, and hopefully to be able to give you some future input. What I'd like to talk to you about, and I mentioned it a lot with the Planning Board and the Growth Study Committee, is any of the rural areas that are quite a ways out of downtown. We really need to come up with some solutions for municipal water or sprinkling houses or better access. So that's where I'm trying to encourage that type of dialogue. But all of those solutions take a lot of work, and right now I'm just listening, and I appreciate you allowing me to speak for a second. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief. Any comments or questions for him?
Well, Chief Slayman, I hope you have a great retirement. I mean, the news is out, of course. The papers had the impending retirement coming up. So if not anything, I wanted to take an opportunity to congratulate you on upcoming retirement and hopefully a very eventful post-retirement inning of your life.
Thank you very much. I have a good team in the background. They're all watching what we're doing here, and they're ready to step up and fill my shoes in a moment's notice. So thank you.
Of course.
I hope it's not too soon.
I know.
We'll
And
miss you
it's
terribly.
moment's notice. a moment's notice, or would you just say, turkey season's coming up, I'm out, bye.
It's coming quick, but thank you very much for the kind comments.
Mary, I think before we shut down, I just wanted to mention I'm on the permanent building committee, and there has been some discussion in our talking about downtown, the reuse of the center school property. Some residential component to that has been discussed also. It would be, wrapped nicely into downtown development.
I personally think that
Yeah.
that would be a great place to live. I mean, once it's renovated, but
There's a good bit of property associated with the center school that's back across the right of way of the Eversource right of way that, they've kind of taken a look at. I don't know, can't recall exactly what's been presented to planning and select board as that study's progressed, but that to me would be a good use that
I would
the
agree.
powers that be hopefully will push toward.
Yeah, I would like that. I think that would be awesome. I really do.
I want a swimming pool back there too. So
Thank you. Thank you for adding that. Okay, so we had tentatively planned to meet again on
August 2nd.
August 2nd, which I believe that, yes, I believe that planning board is meeting, or is that August 9th that they're meeting?
That is August 9th.
Okay, so it doesn't interrupt. Okay. Does everyone still feel that August 2nd is feasible on your calendar?
I will be out of town.
Good, yes, thumbs up. John
yeah, my-
Cutino, I
My
can't see
thumbs
your
up.
thumbs, so.
I know you can't see my thumb. Yeah, I think I'd be fine for the second.
Mary, I'm
Curtis,
just trying to pull up my calendar.
okay.
Mary, is that in person or continuing on Zoom?
We are continuing on Zoom because we're allowed to.
Okay. Has there been a decision about when these meetings will start to be in person, or are we still awaiting guidance?
We can continue on Zoom until next April. But we can always decide as a committee, as a group, when we're ready to start in person. Okay? So at the moment, I'm happy to stay on Zoom, but if anyone wants to bring up it's sooner than April, feel free, and then we'll discuss it.
Through the
Okay.
chair,
Yes.
I would recommend not going in person until October because the town hall does not have air conditioning very well in the.
That's a really good reason. Okay.
Lately, that's very important.
Okay, so Curtis will be missing next time. But everybody else can make it? Ted?
I'm
what's your-
good. Yeah, I just got back from my calendar. I'm good.
Okay, good. Okay, and John, you said it was good for you?
Yeah.
Okay,
As long as we don't have to go to town hall.
no. No, especially in August, no. Okay,
I
so
forgot
August
it.
2nd it is. Did everyone have a chance to read through
Mary?
the minutes that were provided in our email? It was the minutes from June 14th. I looked through them. I don't have any comments. Anyone? Comments?
No
No.
comment.
I didn't look, but I'll trust people who did.
Got it. I do that too.
Motion to accept.
So I'll entertain a motion to accept those. Yes.
Motion,
That's John with the motion
Seconded.
and Sundar second. And roll call vote. Okay. Sundar,
Aye.
Ron,
Aye.
Ted,
Aye.
Rachel,
Yes.
Curtis,
Aye.
Madhu,
Aye.
John,
yes.
and Mary is a yes. So
So 3 yeses, 4 ayes.
minute and the vote goes 3-4. Okay. At the Ron, I know you've been collecting data on traffic, not traffic, parking, parking requirements in various towns. So we're not going to put you on the agenda for August 2nd, but give you a little bit more time to do some research. Okay, sounds good. So next time we will be discussing the tree protection, clear cutting, how we may want to modify this, whether or not we can. We're going to start with the bylaw that we were discussing, but we're not married to that. We can throw it all out and start over if we want to, but we're going to start discussing it. And OSLPD bylaw modifications, if we want to do anything with them, just how people are feeling after having heard from a lot of different points of view and been able to sleep on it for several weeks now. I think that will be good. And then finally, I would like to look over our whole work plan and make sure we're adding in all of the things that we want to incorporate from the Growth Study Committee plan report. And so that's what we'll cover next time. Is that good?
Well, you also have to remember that if we have a full slate and we have our September, October meeting where people come in with the stuff.
New things. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have to leave enough. Let's not, it's like taking 7 subjects in undergraduate school, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not saying that priorities can't be changed based on new ideas that come in from the public and from new members. We will be reforming after August 31st, so it'll be in the first September meeting. We'll do the reformation of the meeting of the committee, and with new members. I know Rhea is leaving because she has so many committees on her plate right now, and
yeah, they just voted me on ZBA. They just voted me to take Rhea's place. So
that's great. So we'll still have John, but he'll be now representing ZBA.
Yeah, I won't be a free
at large. Yeah.
At large. Yeah.
And planning board hasn't done their assignments yet, but any at-large members, definitely get your applications in, please. And any committee member liaisons, please make sure that is done as well. Thanks.
So you're going to stay on, right?
Say again, John?
You're going to stay on, correct?
I will be on the committee, yes.
Okay, good. I didn't want to say all this, it's just like, okay, we're going to do reorganization on planning board and I'm getting off because you guys are pains in the neck. Okay, good.
But I do not intend to be chair this next year. I would be happy to support whomever takes that role, but I do not intend to be chair. So, okay. And I will support you very, very thoroughly.
If you can be nominated and voted on, and it's happened to me before.
Yeah, I suppose, but I can also refuse it.
Mary,
yes.
I believe I heard in your planning board meeting that you will be making decisions on at-large zoning advisory committee positions at your next meeting. Is that true? Did I
John?
not hear that
For
correctly?
the chair, that was the plan, but we don't have the time and we needed to advertise the vacancies. So it's actually going to be at the August 9th meeting.
Okay. I know myself, I have reached out to 2 people who I think would be wonderful members of the zoning advisory committee. I'm not trying to move anybody in our current room off, but I encourage, this is a great committee for people to get involved. I think for a lot of us, this was our first committee in town before we branched out to other things. And I encourage everybody in the room to think about who do you know that we ought to pull into helping us find answers to problems we have in the town, and encourage them to think about this committee. I think it's a wonderfully welcoming and not very pressure-filled committee, and it's a great place to start. So
I
reach
agree,
out to
and
some folks.
I'm thrilled that you identified some additional people. New blood is always good.
Yeah.
So, and we do have several vacancies in terms of our alternates, and there's As you
And-
know, there are very few votes on this committee, and there's a lot of discussion. And even though the alternates wouldn't technically be voting, they would be full participants because it's really all about our discussion. Okay?
The fire chief is going to be retiring and having a lot of time on his hands, and he really knows this town well.
I think that's
That's a
an
good
excellent
point.
idea.
Awesome idea.
I think that's a very
That
good
is a
idea.
great point.
Great idea. Just saying. Just saying.
Yeah, well, we'll give him, a month or two after retirement. How about that? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second.
Second.
And okay, Ron,
Yes.
Sundar,
Yes.
Ted,
Aye.
Rachel,
Yes.
Curtis,
Yes.
Madhu,
Yes.
and John.
I'll do an I this time. That'll be the try.
And Mary. Yes, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank
I'll see
you.
you in a couple of weeks, except
Thank
Curtis.
you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye.